I always found myself drawn to more of the outsider type people. They were more interesting, they had more personality, people like John Waters, like Divine Heidi Fleiss, for example. There was always a couple of people at the table that were a little bit askew. And I think that the outsiders are probably more tangible, more realistic people than the people that get caught up in their own images and persona per se. Certainly you know from Grace Jones, at many dinner parties, dancing around, being self-deprecating, being funny. These are people I could relate to. They were people you could put your finger on and you could trust them, and they were honest, they were open. That was a big part for me, when people are open and honest, and that really allows you to capture and get inside their heads as far as who they are as individuals. When I look back over all the years of taking pictures, it's interesting how my style has remained pretty much the same. I've stayed pretty true to my vision. I don't think I've been flavor of the month, and I've never felt a need to change my vision in terms of how I see things. It's always been pretty black and white, and it's always been pretty straightforward. I don't think there's a lot of tricks to my photography. I think most of what I try to capture in an image is the essence of the human being, to get them to connect. If there's nothing going on in the eyes, there's nothing going on in the portrait. And so to win their trust and confidence and to share my vision with them is how I try to pull that out. So for me, it's nothing magical or anything special in my portraits, I don't think. It's about communication and connecting with an individual. I guess reviewing my archives, the pictures that struck the strongest memories in my mind were the people that I photographed for many years. I shot Bet for 40 years, which is a lot of work. Did almost everything for Bet for those 40 years. It was pretty amazing. And David, David was so creative, and we shot all over the world, New York and London and LA and God knows where else. And he was always fun to shoot because he always had such great ideas. So there was and even Michael Jackson I shot, a bunch of times, and we always came up with, he was a very creative person because he would call me before the shoot and we would discuss the shoot in depth so that when he came in I knew exactly what we were going to do, and we had total free reign to do whatever we wanted to do. Oftentimes, you do get a subject in front of your lens that's not always the easiest person to photograph, and for me that's the greatest challenge. I think it's one of the reasons I never really showed tremendous interest or focus on fashion photography for myself as an artist. I've always liked the challenge of breaking through that upper crust with some of these people to get inside their heads, and a lot of times it was coming up or down to their level, and it was always siding with a celebrity over any creative director or talent that was basically running the show, so to speak, that I was like a hired gun for. I wanted the people in front of my lens to realize I was playing for their team. I shared my vision with them. I always shared my Polaroids with them. Later, the digital captures, obviously. And I wanted a picture that both of us would be proud of, realizing that it's not only my time behind the camera, but it's their time in front of the lens. And to get a good portrait, I want both of us to be proud of it. When I'm shooting a photo session, I like organization. I'm very anal about having things organized and prepared. I want to have a path to follow, but that path, that road from point A to point Z, is meant to be broken, and you're meant to go off on all these little nuances and channels, because for me, it's totally about being spontaneous. All I want to do is establish a framework for a photograph when I'm about to take a picture, and then that frame needs to be broken and cracked and challenged, so to speak. And so I never like to be completely locked down to anything specific, because you're never going to get to where you want to be with one set way, because it never goes that way. But at the end of the day, when I went to New York in the early 80s and to see my dear friend Antonio Lopez and tell him, oh, I shot Tootsie, Big Chill, Scarface, excited to tell him about my successes, he looked me coldly in the eyes and he said, well, that's great, Greg, but what are you doing for yourself? And I realized ultimately I was a hired gun. I was basically creating work for other people and nothing for myself. And he said, if you want to have longevity in this business, you need to find a creative outlet outside the realm of your commercial work. And he was so right. And I came back to my studio and thought about it and decided to start shooting nudes and pulling the camera back, shedding people of their clothes, but maintaining that dynamic range between my highlights and my shadows and my work. And that's what kind of brought on my work of figure studies.